I never thought I'd be the person standing in the middle of a high-end gala, holding a glass of vintage champagne while looking the man who destroyed me right in the eyes. But life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. 5 years ago, I was standing in the rain outside a cheap apartment complex with 2 trash bags containing everything I owned, watching the man I thought I was going to marry drive away in a car I helped him pay for, and all he could tell me was that I was no longer a good investment, because I didn't fit into the high society life he was finally starting to build. He told me I was dead weight, a reminder of a struggle he wanted to forget, and that a girl who worked 3 retail jobs just to keep him in law school would never be able to stand beside a partner at a top-tier firm. I was broken, penniless, and completely alone. Yet here I am today, owning the very building he's trying to lease an office in, watching his jaw hit the floor as he realizes the poor girl he discarded is now the one who holds his entire future in her hands. I have to ask you all before I get into the details of how I took him down. Do you think some people are just born cruel? Or does money turn them into monsters? And would you have gone as far as I did to get your revenge? Let's go back to the beginning, back when I was 22 and working myself to the bone. I met Mark during my junior year of college. I was working at a local coffee shop, and he was the ambitious law student who always ordered a black coffee and stayed until closing. We fell in love, or at least I thought we did, in the most humble way possible. We lived on ramen noodles, shared a single mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled like damp laundry, and dreamed of the day we'd finally make it. I dropped out of my own degree program to work extra shifts because Mark's law school tuition was astronomical, and he promised me, he swore on his life, that once he passed the bar and got into a firm, it would be my turn. I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight. I was a waitress in the morning, a grocery bagger in the afternoon, and a cleaning lady for office buildings at night. I remember one night specifically. It was mid-January and the buses had stopped running because of a blizzard. I had to walk 4 miles home after scrubbing floors in a corporate building. My hands were so cold they felt like they were burning, and my shoes were literally falling apart at the seams. When I got home, Mark was upset, not because I was freezing, but because I hadn't picked up his dry-cleaned suit for his mock trial the next day. I apologized through chattering teeth and spent the next hour hand-steaming his jacket over a pot of boiling water. I did it because I believed in us. I thought his success was my success. I spent 3 years wearing clothes from thrift store bins and skipping meals, so he could have the right textbooks and the right networking dinners. I remember the hunger pangs. I remember the way my stomach would growl while I watched him eat a steak dinner I had bought with my overtime pay, while I told him I had already eaten at work. I wasn't just his girlfriend. I was his benefactor, his maid, and his cheerleader. I was proud of him. When he finally got a junior associate position at one of the biggest firms in the city, I thought we had won. I even bought a small cake to celebrate that night, waiting for him to come home so we could finally start our life. But he didn't come home to celebrate with me. He came home to pack. He didn't even look me in the eye at first. He just started grabbing his expensive leather bags, the ones I'd saved up for 6 months to buy him, and throwing his designer shirts into them. He looked at me with this cold, detached expression, like I was a stranger he'd just met on the subway. He told me that his new colleagues were starting to ask about his better half, and that he couldn't possibly introduce me to them. He said my hands were callous from manual labor, my clothes were cheap, and my lack of a degree was an embarrassment. He literally said, "Sarah, you were great for the struggle, but you don't belong in the success." He left me with nothing but $50 and a month's rent paid, telling me to find someone on my own level. The silence in that apartment after he left was deafening. I sat on that same stained mattress we'd shared for years and realized that I had literally built a man who thought I wasn't good enough to stand next to him. I spent the first week in a daze, sleeping on the floor of that empty apartment, but then something inside me snapped. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to be so successful that he could never escape the sight of my name. I took the last of my savings and moved to a different city to start over. I went back to school, taking night classes while working 12-hour shifts at a tech startup. I was obsessed. I started as a data entry clerk, but I listened to every conversation the executives had. I began to realize that the world of high finance and real estate wasn't about who had the most money, but who had the most leverage. While Mark was busy trying to look rich, I was busy learning how to actually be rich. I finished my degree in half the time, fueled by a mixture of caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. My transition from a clerk to an analyst was fast, but my move into private equity was even faster. I had this uncanny ability to see the cracks in a company's foundation. During those missing years, I didn't have a social life. I didn't go on dates. I didn't buy new clothes unless the old ones were unwearable. I remember living in a basement apartment where the pipes leaked, saving every single dollar to invest in a small property management firm. I was working 100-hour weeks. I was the person who stayed at the office until the janitors came in. The irony wasn't lost on me. One night, I saw Mark's face in a legal journal. He had won some mid-level case and was posing with a glass of scotch. He looked soft. He looked like he had never known a day of real work in his life. That image became my wallpaper. It was the last thing I saw before I went to sleep, and the first thing I saw when I woke up. I started a small consulting firm out of a library basement. My first big break came when I identified a massive oversight in a local zoning law that allowed me to help a small tech company secure a massive warehouse for half the price. My commission from that one deal was more than I had earned in the previous 3 years combined. But I didn't stop there. I began to study Mark's new firm, Sterling Vance and Associates. I realized they were heavily invested in commercial real estate projects that were struggling. I started buying up the debt of the companies they represented. I wanted to own the ground they walked on. I spent my nights reading his firm's public filings. I knew their overhead, I knew their expansion plans, and I knew they were overleveraged. They were desperate to move into a new flagship building to project an image of stability they didn't actually have. I formed Zenith Holdings, a shell company that allowed me to operate in the shadows. I spent 2 years quietly acquiring properties in the financial district. I lived in a tiny apartment even when I hit my first million, just so I could keep my capital liquid for the final move. I watched Mark's social media from a burner account. I saw him at country clubs. I saw his wedding photos to Claire Sterling, the daughter of the firm's founding partner. He looked so satisfied, so elite. He had no idea that the woman he called dead weight was currently the largest anonymous shareholder in his father-in-law's most ambitious project. During these years, I became a student of psychological warfare. I didn't just want to take his money. I wanted to dismantle the very identity he had built. I studied the people he associated with. I learned their weaknesses. I found out that the Sterling family pride was their greatest vulnerability. They were obsessed with their lineage and their reputation for breeding and excellence. Mark had sold them a lie that he was one of them. He had fabricated a history of prep schools and summer homes in the Hamptons. He had even hired actors to play his wealthy, distant parents for a brief brunch before the wedding. I had the real birth certificates. I had the records of his father's bankruptcy and his mother's humble job as a grocery clerk in a town 3 states over. I had the truth, and in the world Mark wanted to live in, the truth was a lethal weapon. To make sure my plan was foolproof, I started testing Mark's integrity from afar. I used a third party to offer him a shortcut on a high-profile case, a chance to win through slightly shady means. He took the bait every single time. He wasn't just a snob. He was fundamentally lazy. He thought his new status meant he didn't have to work hard anymore. He was delegating his research to tired interns and taking all the credit. I documented every single instance. I had a digital paper trail that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. I also found out that he was being unfaithful to Claire. He was seeing a paralegal at a rival firm, thinking he was too smart to get caught. I didn't use this information for blackmail. That's too small. I saved it for the explosion. I wanted the Sterlings to see him not just as a liar, but as a parasite that was draining their family's dignity. My life became a chess match where I was playing both sides of the board. I was the one who suggested, through an anonymous broker, that the Sterlings should invest their family trust into a specific real estate bond. The very bond that my company secretly controlled. I was literally weaving the rope he was going to hang himself with. I spent months preparing for the day our paths would cross. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the psychology of the moment. I knew Mark's greatest fear was being exposed as a fraud. Someone who didn't belong in the high society world he worked so hard to infiltrate. I had gathered evidence of his unethical practices. How he had pressured junior associates to ghostwrite his briefs. How he had manipulated billing hours to impress the partners. And most importantly, how he had lied to Claire and her father about his family's wealth. Every time I felt a hint of hesitation or felt like maybe I should just move on and be happy, I would look at the scar on my palm from the time I cut myself cleaning a broken bottle in a corporate office while he was out at a law school mixer. That scar reminded me that I didn't owe him mercy. I owed him a lesson. I hired a team of the best forensic accountants and private investigators to ensure that when I struck, there would be no way for him to crawl back out of the hole he had dug for himself. I was no longer the girl in the rain. I was the storm. I began to leak small, untraceable bits of information to the firm's competitors. I made sure their stock prices dipped just enough to make them desperate for the new headquarters deal. I wanted them to feel like the Crown Plaza was their only salvation. I was creating a vacuum that only I could fill. I also started a quiet correspondence with an anonymous whistleblower inside the firm. Someone Mark had stepped on to get his promotion. This person gave me the final piece of the puzzle. Mark had been skimming a small percentage off the top of a trust fund he managed for one of the firm's minor clients. It wasn't much, but in the legal world, it was enough for disbarment and a prison sentence. I had him. I had him from every possible angle. So that is the situation I found myself in, sitting on a mountain of success, while the man who threw me away like trash was finally within my reach. I had the power to either ignore him and move on with my beautiful life, or I could use my resources to show him exactly what it feels like to lose everything you've worked for. I had reached a point where money was no longer an object, but justice was still a debt unpaid. I had spent years building this trap, and now all I had to do was wait for him to walk into it. I had practiced my speech in front of the mirror, not out of vanity, but to ensure that my voice wouldn't tremble with the old pain. I wanted him to see a woman he didn't recognize, a woman who was a titan of industry, not a girl with holes in her shoes. Before I tell you what happened when our paths finally crossed, and the absolute chaos that ensued when I decided to strike, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let the past go and stayed happy? Or would you have made sure he felt every bit of the pain he caused you? Seriously, tell me, is revenge worth it, or does it just keep you tied to the person you're trying to forget? Would you have sent him to prison, or was losing his career enough? I need to know your thoughts before I reveal the final blow. The opportunity for the ultimate confrontation came when Mark's firm hit a massive financial snag. They were looking to expand into a new headquarters, a prestigious skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. This wasn't just any building, it was the Crown Plaza, the most sought-after address in the city. To secure it, they needed a massive injection of capital and a long-term lease agreement that was favorable to their partners. My company, under a subsidiary name they didn't recognize, had recently purchased that entire block, including the Crown Plaza. Mark was the lead lawyer assigned to negotiate the deal with the mystery owner. He arrived at the meeting room looking smug, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, acting like he was the king of the world. He was flanked by two junior associates, talking loudly about his upcoming vacation to the Maldives. He didn't even look at the person sitting at the head of the table at first. He just started laying out his documents, talking in that condescending tone I remembered so well. When I finally spoke and told him to sit down, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He stuttered, unable to even say my name. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the same cold, detached expression he had used on me 5 years ago. I looked at his proposal, flipped through the pages slowly while the room remained dead silent, and then I laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a laugh of genuine amusement at how small he seemed now. I told the board of directors of his firm, who were patched in via video call, that the proposal was amateur, and that I had no intention of leasing to a firm that employed people with such poor character. The senior partners were confused, demanding to know what I meant. So I told them. I told them everything. I didn't leave out a single detail. I told them about the 3 jobs, the holes in my shoes, the law school tuition I paid, and the night he threw me out like a bag of garbage because I was no longer a good investment. I watched Mark's hands shake as I spoke. I then pulled out a folder of my own. It contained proof that Mark had padded his billable hours and had been using his father-in-law's connections to bypass several ethics regulations within the firm. I had spent 6 months hiring private investigators to find every skeleton in his closet. I revealed how he had lied about his background to fit into their world. I then played an audio recording of Mark speaking to a colleague a few weeks prior, where he laughed about how he tricked the Sterlings into thinking he was royalty. The silence in the room was like a physical weight. Mr. Sterling, who was on the call, let out a sound that was half gasp, half growl. But I wasn't finished. I had spent months quietly buying up the shares of the development project his father-in-law was betting his entire fortune on. I was the majority shareholder of the holding company that owned the land rights. In the middle of that meeting, I called my broker and gave the order to pull the funding for the Sterling project. The realization hit Mark all at once. He hadn't just lost a lease. He had destroyed his wife's family's empire by leading me right to them. I remember Mark trying to stand up, his legs shaking so much he had to lean on the expensive mahogany table. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but Mr. Sterling's voice cut through the speaker like a blade. He didn't even address Mark, he addressed me. He asked if there was any way to save the project. I told him, not as long as that man is a part of your family or your firm. I gave them an ultimatum. Fire him, disbar him, and cut him off completely, or watch your entire legacy burn to the ground. It wasn't even a choice for them. They threw him to the wolves within minutes. I watched Mark realize that the people he had spent years trying to impress didn't care about him at all. He was just a tool to them, and he was now a broken one. As the meeting ended, I walked over to him. He was staring at the table, a single tear running down his face. I leaned in and whispered, I hope the success was worth the struggle, Mark. Because now you have neither. I walked out of that room with my head held high, feeling a sense of closure that no amount of money could ever buy. Within 48 hours, the dominoes began to fall. Mark wasn't just fired. He was being sued by his own father-in-law for bringing this curse upon their family, and for the ethics violations I had exposed. The trust fund skimming I had discovered was reported to the Bar Association and the police. His wife, Claire, filed for divorce when she realized the golden boy she married was actually a fraud who had built his career on the back of a girl he treated like garbage. She didn't want anything to do with a man who was now toxic to her family's name. Mark tried to call me 50 times that night. I didn't answer. He came to my office a week later, bypassed security, and was eventually found crying in the lobby. He looked exactly like I did that night in the rain, broken, desperate, and wearing a suit that was now wrinkled and stained. He begged for a loan, telling me he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that he always loved me. He actually had the audacity to say that we could start over with my money. I looked him in the eye and told him the same thing he told me. Mark, you're just not a good investment. You're dead weight, and I don't want to be reminded of a struggle I've moved past. I watched him get escorted out by security, the same way I had been escorted out of our shared life years ago. I felt a strange sense of emptiness at first, but it was quickly replaced by a profound feeling of lightness. The aftermath was brutal for him. He lost his license to practice law due to the ethics violations and the theft from the trust fund. He avoided prison only by testifying against some other corrupt associates at the firm, which made him an outcast in the entire legal community. He ended up losing his house, his cars, and his high society friends who didn't want to be associated with a failure. His father-in-law made sure he was blacklisted from every major firm in the country. I eventually sold the Crown Plaza building for a massive profit, and used the money to start a foundation called the Second Chance Project. It's a foundation specifically designed to provide scholarships and business grants for women who have had to sacrifice their own education to support others. I realized that my success wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that I never let his cruelty define my worth. I took the very things he used to shame me, my hard work and my humble beginnings, and turned them into my greatest strengths. He is now working as a low-level clerk in a small town, far away from the city lights he craved so much. I heard he's living in a studio apartment that smells like damp laundry, which is irony at its finest. I, on the other hand, am moving on to even bigger ventures. I recently bought a home for my mother and finally went back to finish my own PhD, not because I need the degree for a job, but because I promised myself I would finish what I started before I sacrificed everything for a man who didn't deserve it. I am finally at peace. The most important thing I learned through this whole ordeal is that your past is not a prison, it's a training ground. Every floor I scrubbed gave me the discipline to run a multi-million-dollar company. Every meal I skipped gave me the hunger to never settle for less than I deserved. I don't hate Mark anymore. I don't even think about him unless I'm sharing this story to help someone else who feels like they're at their breaking point. I've realized that while money can buy you a seat at the table, it's your character that determines how long you get to stay there. Mark had the seat, but he never had the soul. He thought he could delete the parts of his life that weren't aesthetic enough, but those were the parts that actually mattered. I am standing here today, not just as a millionaire, but as a whole person who knows exactly what she's worth. I am grateful for the rain, because it taught me how to grow. I am grateful for the betrayal because it taught me how to trust myself. And I am grateful for the silence because it allowed me to finally hear my own voice. Looking back, the moment he left was the greatest gift he ever gave me. If he had stayed, I would have spent my entire life in his shadow. A +1 to a man who never saw me. By throwing me out, he forced me to find my own light. I realize now that I wasn't just working for him back then. I was developing the resilience that would eventually destroy him and build me. The poor girl he laughed at didn't just become a millionaire. She became a queen in a kingdom he'll never even be allowed to visit. My advice to anyone going through something similar is this. Let their rejection be your fuel. Don't waste your time crying over someone who didn't see your value. Spend that time building a life so big that they have to look up just to see your shadow. Your worth isn't determined by who loves you or who leaves you. It's determined by what you do when you're standing in the rain with nothing but your dreams. I'm happy now. Not because I'm rich, but because I'm free. I'm free from the need for his approval, free from the anger, and free from the girl I used to be. I am exactly where I belong, and Mark is exactly where he deserves to be. It's truly crazy how life works out when you refuse to stay down and let someone else dictate your value. I learned that the best revenge isn't just winning. It's becoming someone so powerful and so self-assured that your enemy's opinions of you don't even register on your radar anymore. I used to think I needed his validation to be happy, but the moment I stopped looking for it was the moment I actually became free. If there's a moral to this story, it's that you should never underestimate someone just because they're at their lowest point, because the person you step on today might be the one you have to ask for a job tomorrow. Always stay true to those who help you when you have nothing, because loyalty is the only currency that actually keeps its value when the market crashes. Like this video if you were on my side, and think Mark got exactly what he deserved for his arrogance and his betrayal. Subscribe for more stories like this where the underdog finally takes the lead and shows the world what they're truly made of. Please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by destroying his career and his marriage? Or was this the only way to truly balance the scales? Was his ending too harsh, or was it just justice finally being served? I'll be reading through the comments to see what you guys think about the ethics of my revenge. I'll see you all in the next story.